Once again, it's time for tech support with Tony. Hey class, glad you're here with me. I'm going to go over an important topic. I get a lot of questions about this. I just want to go over the entire concept with you. Today we're going to be talking about temperature differential. Temperature differential. Okay, so let me pull in my little whiteboard here. I'm going to go over some stuff here. Temperature differential. What is it? How does it impact my system? How can I change it if needed? Okay, so temperature differential. Some people refer to it as span, temperature span. We refer to it as temperature differential. So, what is it? I'm going to show you what it is. The temperature differential is how much room temperature change is needed to activate a call for heating or cooling, depending on which mode you're in. So let's talk about the heating mode. So let's say we have our thermostat set to 70 degrees as our set temperature, 70. As the room temperature cools off, when the room temperature drops to 69.5 degrees, that will be our temperature differential that will trigger the call for heat or to turn the heat on. That's how much room temperature change is needed to initiate the call for heat. Now, you're not going to see that in the display because the display only shows you a whole number. There's no decimal points. But behind the scenes, it's measuring every tenth of a degree. And when it gets down to 69.5, then that will turn on the heat. Once the heat turns on, then your room starts warming back up. And when it gets back to 70, then it turns off. And that's your entire cycle. Half a degree. The default differential on our thermostats is half a degree. This can be changed if you want, and we'll get into that. Likewise, if you're in the cooling mode, you have it set at 70. As the room warms up, it's a hot day, the house starts getting warm. When it rises to 70.5, that will trigger the air conditioning on, the cooling system will turn on, and cool the house back down to 70, which is your set point, and then the cooling system will shut off. So that's your half a degree temperature differential. Half a degree. You can change the differential. The default setting is half a degree, like I said. On our thermostats, you can change the differential with an option of 1 degree or 2 degrees. So let's assume that we have changed our temperature differential to 2 degrees. What's going to happen in that case? So how this is going to impact your system, let me get my marker here. We're going to go with the same temperature set point of 70 degrees. But now we've changed our diff, our differential, to 2.0, 2 degrees. That means our room temperature needs to drop 2 degrees. So it would have to go all the way down to 68 before it would engage a call for heat. So that means much more temperature drop is needed before it activates the call for heat. Once we hit the 68 degree mark, then the heat is turned on and it keeps running until it warms back up to 70, which is our set point. That's what we have the thermostat set for. So with a 2 degree differential, we need 2 degree temperature drop before the heat is turned on. And it would be the same thing in the cooling mode. We would need a 2 degree temperature rise before the air conditioning turns on, the cooling system. Once it turns on, the cooling runs, cools it back down to 70, and then your system shuts off. That completes your cycle. So, how does this impact? Well, with a 1/2 degree differential, your room temperature is maintained as tightly as possible. Very little variance. Only a 1/2 degree temperature change swing up and down. It only goes down a 1/2 degree and then right back up. So that maintains the most even, constant room temperature. For many people, that's important. I don't want the room temperature swinging up and down and changing a lot. I want to keep it maintained as consistent as possible. So a 1/2 degree temperature is the default. Some people feel like, well, that causes my system to run too often. It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off, because it's only going down a 1/2 degree. Well, if we change the differential to 2 degrees, then that's going to kind of slow it down, because it's going to require a whole 2 degree drop before it turns on, and then it's going to run for a longer period of time to heat it back up to 70. So in the end, you will have longer but less frequent cycles with a 2 degree differential. With a 1/2 degree differential, you're going to have shorter but more frequent cycles. In the long run, it's about the same amount of run time over the course of a day. Just is it broken up into smaller cycles or longer cycles? This is a personal preference. Sometimes it may be something that you want for your equipment. That's why you can go in and change the differentials. But again, the default is 1/2 degree. And again, that's just for comfort. That's the reason it's at 1/2 degree. Some people don't want a large differential because the 2 degrees in the wintertime, that might feel like it gets pretty cold before it turns on, and they just don't want to accept that. They want to keep it at the same temperature. So a smaller differential is good for them. If you're okay with the temperature swinging up and down, maybe you want a larger differential. You can definitely change that on our thermostats. How do you change a differential? Okay, so this varies depending on which model thermostat you have. You have to access either the installer setup menu or in some cases a user menu to make the differential change. Let me grab one here. On this model 5020, we can change our differential by accessing the installer setup menu. On this model, it would be the return and the down arrow. Hold those two buttons for the same few seconds, and it will, oh, actually this thermostat's locked. Let me unlock it first. I'd used this thermostat in another video. Okay, now that it's unlocked, we can get into the installer menu. Return and down. Hold those for a few seconds. We get into the menu. First item, residential. Press the button under where it says next. This is for a 7-day program schedule, 12-hour clock format, Fahrenheit degrees, auto changeover, your system type. The next one here says DIFF, DIFF 1. You can see it's 0.5. Use the up and down arrow key, you can select 1 degree, 2 degree. That's where you change your differential. If you set it to 2 degrees, then press the return, now it's going to operate at a 2 degree differential. So meaning set point on this one, 79, temperature would have to drop to 77 before it calls for heat, warm it back up to 79, then shut off. That's differentials. That's how that works. That's how it impacts your system. That's how you change it. If you got a multi-stage system where you've got 2 stages of heat, maybe a heat pump and electric heat strips, or a gas furnace backup, or a 2-stage furnace. If you set your system type right, then you will have a second differential that activates the second stage of heat. So if the first stage is not keeping up and you drop additional degrees, it will activate your second stage. So that's a little more advanced setup. You got to have multi-stage equipment, HVAC system for that. Concept is still the same. It's a temperature differential. It's all based on room temperature change. How much change happens in the room to trigger the call for heat? Time is not part of the equation. Some manufacturers have a time-based factor where they allow the system to run for so many minutes and then shut it off. That might work for certain applications. However, what if it ran for that number of minutes and still didn't heat the house up warm enough? Now you got to wait until so much time goes by before it turns on again. Ours strictly use temperature-based differential to activate and shut off your system. So that's what temperature differential is. Room temperature change needed to trigger your call for heat or cooling. I hope this video maybe answered some questions about temperature differential. You can always call for live support. I'll put the number in the video description. Thanks for coming to class today.